This is the ongoing webinar series that Results of Strategy has been doing for a few years. This is the first one of the year, so we appreciate a large attendance. And we have an interesting topic today that seems to have gathered a lot of interest with technology and automation. Just to remind you, you can ask questions throughout the webinar. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a little panel that has questions. I also want to point out that we will be sending copies of this webinar after we're complete. So if for some reason you have to drop off or you decide to check your emails, you'll have this available to yourself. Just, you know, this system sort of tells us when people are paying attention and when they're moving their mouse in other places. Not that we really care, but just so you're aware of that. There's also going to be a brief poll that we're going to ask you to fill out. You'll see that also on the right-hand side of your screen. You can pretty much fill it anytime you want. I will launch it at some point, and you'll see what it is and as it's appropriately done. So today's topic is technology and automation. And so we're going to jump right into it. So I want to introduce our panelists. I'm excited about who we have here. We've got Seth Temko, the VP of Marketing at Xenial, and I'm going to have him explain what he does and who he is in a moment. And we also have Brian Pearson, Chief Technology Officer from Stacked Restaurants, very innovative concept on the West Coast. So Seth, let me pass it on to you. Go ahead and give us your life story in 30 seconds or less.
Sure. Thank you, Fred, for having me on. My background is 20 years in hospitality technology, which includes having been head of product management at a technology company, having been a CTO, and in my role right now, I'm the head of product marketing at Xenial. You'll recognize some names of technologies we have, such as Expient Iris. We recently acquired SciComm, and so SciComm is now part of Xenial. We're very excited about that. RTI comes with it as well. And besides those tried and true technologies installed in 51,000 locations in the world, we've also been building and are releasing now to new brands the Restaurant Cloud, which is full cloud capabilities for ordering and back of house.
So, Seth, one of the reasons I asked you to be on here is that you guys really have an end-to-end solution for very large sales companies. Are you also able to service and support smaller companies?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're happy to work with mid-sized brands, and sometimes they have advantages in that they move faster than the very large brands.
Excellent. All right, next, Brian, go ahead and give us your life story.
Thanks, Fred, and thanks for inviting me on. Started in the restaurant industry as an operator, ended up being in the technology shops of companies like Cheesecake Factory and Ruby's Diner, and led the IT shop at BJ's Restaurants. And now I'm with Stacked Restaurants, which is a startup in Southern California. We have 5 restaurants today, and we were the world's first full-service restaurant to have iPads, or tablets, I guess you'd say, for a fully integrated point-of-sale solution.
Yeah, and that was innovative at its time. And I know that you recently had an investment in your company that's going to allow you to start growing, hopefully outside of Southern California. So we look forward to having a Stack near everyone on this webinar.
Yes, we do.
So part of what we're going to talk about is, you know, the rate of change happening in the restaurant space, especially in the technology area, is dizzying. It's very disruptive. And it's happening for a lot of reasons. So I'm going to ask some of you to reflect on this. How many of you are really ready for the rise of delivery services? And every time I asked someone that, 99.9% of people said no. Unless their brand was already thinking about it, they weren't ready for this huge wave that took over. Now, when we look back, as we'll talk about it today, you'll see why that happened, but it wasn't visible to us. And then on top of it, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of tech companies starting up. They're always offering you some different things that they can do for you to make your life better. And how do you figure out which one to choose? And how do you make sense of all this? And that's part of our talk today. The other thing is, with all this talk about technology, we have to balance high touch with high tech. And does technology enhance the guest and employee experience, or does it just make it damn more complicated? And this business is tough to begin with. And now with all this technology, I mean, think about a poor manager at a store. They got to be a human resource expert, a plumber, an electrician. They got to be a chef. They got to understand how to use every type of technology imaginable to them. And yet they're being forced at the same time not to spend too much time in the back office. It's a really high pressure job. And for those of you who work in corporate offices, you know that that has really changed, especially in the areas of marketing. So ultimately, what do we do with this? And it's sort of adapt or die, survival of the fittest, and that's what we want to talk about in terms of how we move forward. Excuse me. I'm recovering from laryngitis, so I apologize if I cough a bit. Many of you may have seen this movie, and I think that this is a good metaphor for what's going on with companies today in the technology space. You're blindfolded, surrounded by this scary monster called technology, going down a river that you have no idea where it's going to end. And we're going to try and give you some guideposts today as we move forward in this webinar. I'm going to start by asking Seth, because this is the issue. Tech departments right now have legacy technology, POS being the oldest one. Not that anyone has a DOS-based system anymore, but they really haven't had a big expenditure in most cases after Y2K. And now we have this digital consumer that's demanding us to be able to do all these things. How do you stay relevant in today's world without having to spend a fortune to change your whole infrastructure?
Yeah, so this is the question of CapEx and OpEx and the spending challenges within it, and then within the budget challenges of the value propositions that you can deliver with your current state of technology versus the new needs that you have. From our perspective, we have a number of our technologies that they're tried and true. They work really well, and really big brands are working on them. But we know that moving forward, the value of IT and creating a whole bunch of a network within each store, and then networking those networks, and then bringing that data somehow together to corporate to make good business decisions, it's just not enough. And so if you're trying to future-proof your business, this kind of perspective isn't going to get you there. It's not going to move you to where you need to do. So, we've been building an entire web platform, but we know that for brands, you can't just move from traditional infrastructure to web infrastructure overnight. It's too disruptive, let alone if you have the resources and the will to do it. So our perspective is that you really need to look to hybridize and to connect cloud technologies and digital, and basically be extensive in your capabilities to existing infrastructure. And then as you find competitive gains because of those technologies, it's going to draw your whole organization to want to retroactively go back and change that equation. One of the great things that we found and we present to heads of technology is to point out that if you move to a web cloud platform like we have, then you can skip the CapEx spend. We can structure it so now it's an OpEx, and so the conversation they have with the franchisees is completely different.
Great, good. And so one of the reasons that all this technology is taking place and this change is that look at some statistics by McKinsey. Venture capital firms poured $1.1 billion into food and beverage startups. And this includes some CPG startups as well. Some of you are familiar with those home delivery companies like Blue Apron. But it's an amazing amount of money. So if you put that kind of money into startups, it's going to ultimately affect us like a tsunami. And that's really what's been going on. The other comment that was made on this blog, again by McKinsey, a blog called Fuel, is to always be in beta. And Brian, I'm going to ask you that. I mean, you run an IT shop. I don't know how you can tell us how many people you have in it, but you got only 5 restaurants. How in God's name can you stay on top of all the changes that are going on in technology right now for restaurants?
Yeah, I guess I would make a couple comments to that. I think to the notion of always being in beta, I recall when I was at BJ's, before iPads even came into the marketplace, we were looking at any and every tablet we could get our hands on so that we could start benefiting from the inherent efficiencies of having servers walking around with that technology. So we were seeing the need for it even before, before the suppliers were enabling it. As it relates to, these smaller IT shops, I think we're in an incredible time where all these software as service solutions are becoming available to us. If I roll back 20 years ago to my days at Cheesecake Factory, when we wanted to stand up a database server for just doing analytics, we were building a whole server room out. We were setting up the farm. We were hiring a network engineer. Now inside of 45 minutes, I have an EC2 server up and running with SQL on it and SQL reporting services. So it's an incredibly, I don't know, enabled time, I guess, for those departments who can astutely use technology in appropriate ways. And by the way, that EC2 server, when I scale it down to shut off in the evenings and only turn on, the next morning at 4 a.m., it costs me something like $65 a month. So, I think what we have to do now is be a little bit more creative about the ways we use technology and what technologies we're going to leverage, and always considering the entire infrastructure. But the tools are definitely there.
Well, this graphic here shows you what happens in an internet minute. This is just from 2018. I'm sure it's going to be updated. It's pretty incredible, what's going on with it. So as you glance at this, I want you to think about how many transactions per minute are taking place in restaurants across the country, or just in your company alone, or just in your single location if you're a single unit operator. It's an incredible amount of activity that's going on, and that's part of what's really happening to us. We're drowning in data and starved for information. And some of the broader trends that we see across the industry are as follows. And I'll have Brian and Seth comment on them as they see fit. So generally in a large scale, the digital demands are coming out of an analog world. That's hard. But given the fact that the smartphone is now a ubiquitous device, we understand why that's occurring. And you have to adapt to that, just like we talked about the delivery system. These new technologies continue to emerge. Now, they haven't been monetized yet, but we're going to be hearing more of this. Facial recognition, voice, and artificial intelligence, that's big stuff. And it's going to change the way we do our business in some significant ways. And if you're a restaurant company, what are you going to do when you're being faced with, you got, maybe 15, 20% of your volumes going out the back door to a delivery driver? What do you do with new buildings, the footprints for that? Are dining rooms obsolete? Do we need to do drive-through? Even for full service restaurants, are you considering doing alternative ways of picking up your food? The other thing to look at too is that at the end of the day, the data you have about your customers, either as a broad scale aggregate, like grains of sand on the beach, combined a giant beach, or the individual sand granules, it should be viewed as an asset, very, very important. And how do you really figure it out, and how do you monetize it? You have companies like Kava, who hired a data scientist and only had half a dozen restaurants, and were able to really develop powerful understandings in the relationship that they have with their guests, made them very successful now, almost 40 restaurants. And of course, here's an example of sort of the small eating the big. They bought, Zoe's, which was, 10 times their size. And what are they going to do with that brand as they bring this type of view of the business and intelligence into it? The other comment is to understand this notion of omni-channel. Omni-channel is a term that comes out of the retail business. It came out of the idea that initially you bought things in a store in bricks and mortars, and ultimately you bought it online. And then it became sort of a unified front, where now if you're, let's say, I'm going to say Nordstrom's as an example, you could be on a Pinterest page and buy something through a photo you saw. You could be on your app, you could be in a store, and now they have pop-up registers. You can buy something online, return to the store. You can buy something in the store and return it to their online shipping. It wasn't that way. Restaurant omni-channel, a little bit sort of, again, a kind of a loose metaphor or analogy, is your function of to-go delivery as well as on-premise feeding. Brian or Seth, any comments on that?
I would make one comment on the new emerging technologies. I mean, as I was driving up to LA today, I heard 3 different ads that referenced telling your Alexa or telling your smart home to, whether it was listening to NPR or whether it was placing an order on Amazon. So I think we as technologists in the restaurant industry, we also have to recognize that is coming into people's lives now in a very real way. Fred, when you and I were talking the other day, I pointed out that my wife, to text, she uses her voice now instead of texting it, instead of typing it. So I think we just all have to really start getting that in our heads and preparing for that next change. We have a couple of initiatives going now where we're using Facebook chat bots for people to be able to place orders. It's certainly a different paradigm, and we have to think differently about the way we present our offerings to our consumer. But if we aren't kind of positioning ourselves that way, I think we'll definitely be at a deficit in the very near future.
All right. As we move to infrastructure, the technology function has joined human resources and finance as sort of a universal ground floor function. All the other departments, be it marketing, operations, facilities, development, whatever, sit on top of that. And so Technology is pervasive. It is everywhere. If you pulled the technology out of a restaurant today, the business would shut down. The good news is that technology costs are dropping just because of the ubiquitous nature of how technology works. But the problem we have is that companies can no longer keep up with the amount of data that's being retained by them through all these applications we're talking about. And we're going to spend a little bit of time later on talking about the rise of the CMTO and data scientists. The other area that's probably been the big disruption in technology that Seth commented on is how cloud POS has become a disruptor to legacy hardware. And that's really changing the whole technology space in ways we can't even imagine. So, Seth, what are your views on that?
I think that the advantage today with cloud is tremendous. So if you think about it, the value proposition for IT being an infrastructure and hardware operating system layers, et cetera, you can, as Brian was saying, sign up with AWS or Azure or Google Cloud and other providers, and you can, offload and move that over to some other company that has economies of scale that just blow you away, right? The costs they can provide are significant. Then our focus as a company, because we use AWS for our cloud restaurant product, is basically to build the logic, the business logic and rules and everything you need at the SaaS layer. And we do it modularly, and we do it through microservices, so it can be very quick to change brand by brand by brand. Those same technologies are available to everybody on this call, everybody in the world, right? So from the perspective of you can use third parties that leverage SaaS for all sorts of functions and capabilities, regardless of department, it does take research. It does take some experimentation to do that. But if you can use a third party that's already invested, has the people, and you can leverage that, great. If you're doing it on your own and piecemeal, it may mean several pieces of technology you need to make to work with each other, but it's all there. If you can prove the value, then it begins your migration to a whole different structure for your business. And that truly begins an iteration towards future-proofing your business.
That's great. So I'm going to move on, speed it up a little bit, because we're going to cover these things. So the rest of it, there's been impact on marketing and also on operations. And if you are in states that have $15 minimum wage, you could tell every one of us just the impact of that and what it's going to force you to do in terms of productivity and different things as you move forward. So let's move on to the next one. And so I'm going to show you a few graphics. We're going to go through it quickly. This is an eye chart of how several companies are looking at technology in the space, but I thought it'd be helpful for those of you who have not viewed it holistically. And you can see that you could literally take front of the house, middle of the house, back of the house, and assign a bunch of different companies that are trying to get your business there. That's just one tough decision you have to make. The other thing is, do they work well with each other? Do they play nice in the sandbox? And that's one of the reasons I have Brian as well as Seth out here, because they both have a different view of how do you approach this? How do you make a decision in this crazy world? Here's another one that sort of breaks out the operations on the right-hand side and customer experience on the left-hand side. Another way of looking at a brand wheel of typical technology solutions that are available for you to pick from. And these are going to be available to you on the deck. I have the sources on there as well. If you need to study a little bit more carefully, be able to do it later on. This graphic I actually like. This one's kind of hard to read. This is from Tech Table. And they show on the outer ring is your guest experience, which is more of the orangey color. The blue color is more of the B2B operations and systems. Again, a whole slew of different functions: search and discovery, reservations and waiting, loyalty, the outside, inside, human resources, food waste management, smart kitchens. And here I just sort of blew up that inner blue ring so you can see more specifically. This gives you an idea why it's so difficult to make decisions. It's a dizzying array of choices, and yet we're faced with the fact that if we don't adapt and start understanding what these things can do for us and have them work in our benefit in a differentiated way, we could really lose relevance, and that's really difficult. So I'm going to show you what I find to be a much simpler way of looking at it. And this is what I use to help people who are non-technical. When Seth was speaking just a couple of minutes ago, he used 4 or 5 acronyms, which unless you understand what he's talking about, it goes way over your head. And by all means, feel free to reach out to him and he'll explain to you what he meant by all those different terms. But here we basically show that we have guest-facing operational as quadrant upper left-hand side. These are the things that are sort of in the front of the house: tabletop media, the drive-through kiosks, digital menus as examples. You can read them as I go through this thing. The operational internal are sort of the older systems and processes that are used for workflow management to help you manage the restaurant a lot easier. There's a lot of companies who are doing things in this area. It's the granddaddy being, POS companies, but then you've got all the things from intelligent kitchen, workforce management, back office, accounting. It's a very, very large area. The lower left-hand quadrant is what I call revenue generation. These are things that maybe are not in the restaurant. They may be external to the restaurant. Mobile is a big one, of course. Anything you're doing in terms of email outreach, digital branding, ways to try and generate revenue to connect with guests. This quadrant is the one that's getting a lot of attention. It's sexy. It's the beneficiary of smartphones. While there is innovation in all quadrants, this is the one that most people think about when they think about technology today for restaurants. The fourth quadrant, the lower right-hand quadrant, which is analytics, to me just basically takes all the data that is generated from the previous three quadrants and tries to rationalize them. Is where you go in there and try and figure it out. This is where data scientists come to play. This is where you try and draw knowledge out of the data and then wisdom from that knowledge. You can take action on it. Artificial intelligence fall in here. Some of your CRM analysis and social media sentiment. And we'll be seeing more of that a little bit later on. So I'm going to launch our quick poll. We'll see if this can work for you. So for those of you who are checking the email, if you don't mind just flipping back over, you'll see a little quick poll that'll show up here. And we're going to ask you to fill out that poll. If you can just give us some responses. And I see quickly the question basically being, in terms of IT, how does your company compare? It's a bit of a horse race. Option B is pulling ahead as the same as competitors, with option A right now is 32% better than competitors, though that keeps on changing. So I'm going to keep it up there for another few seconds. Thank you all for participating in it. We've got about 60% voting. The rest of you finish your email and get back on here, so we can move on. And I'm just going to give it another 15 seconds, and we'll see where we end up. 3, 2, 1. All right, poll is closed, and so the winner is the same as competitors by 39%, better than competitors 28 or 27, and we lag behind 35%. So that's interesting. So the lag behind and same as competitors are very close. So we're going to share that with all of you there. It'll be part of the results you see. So I guess it's good that you're on this webinar, so you can really begin to see ways that you can come ahead and differentiate yourself. So that was very interesting data in terms of the survey we just did for all the participants. So let's get down into the real world. What do CTOs want? So we're going to use some material that was created by Hospitality Technology Magazine in their annual survey of technology for restaurants. In fact, in the middle of collecting the data for this next release coming up here that we'll present it at MERTEC in the spring. As you can see by this chart, there's several things that are done. Let me make some definitions here for you. Data leaders and digital leaders are self-described attributes. So if you're a CTO, Chief Technology Officer, you may consider yourself a digital leader. If you're a CIO, Chief Information Officer, you may consider yourself a data leader. And so that's the self-described name that you want to use here. The gray bars are the ones that are the aggregate result of the scoring. And we're not going to talk about all these things today. There's just a few things that we do want to point out. And of course, the highlighted areas are things that they've done. But let me just mention a couple that we are going to discuss today. So improving digital customer engagement and loyalty. This is a growing area, and it's not a surprise given that smartphones have now become the marketing tool of the future until something else replaces it. For the time being, this is what's replaced broadcast. Digital as well as print media is now really being done on your smartphone. In fact, most websites now are being designed to be read on smartphones rather than desktop or laptop. Customer analytics, and we'll be exploring this a little bit when we get to our data section. Improving employee productivity is an important area, and we're not going to focus on that today because that's a whole webinar in and of itself. But with the rise of minimum wage, there are now companies beginning to do things to help employees get more engaged and increase productivity. I do want to highlight the fact that they've noted here that third-party delivery services is of interest. We have done a webinar on this before, so if you go back into our archive, you'll be able to download it and see what we have to say about that. The top 10 areas for deeper insights in 2018. Number one, staffing and labor management. There's that productivity issue again. And so that's something that we'll be exploring in the future. Promotions effectiveness is coming about because the marketing department now has a larger tech budget than the technology department. And it's the rise of the chief marketing technology officer. One of the biggest challenges when I've met with CMOs is helping to show an ROI for some of their digital expenditure. And that's hard to do. If you're dealing in the world of Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TripAdvisor, how do you show that you're actually getting butts in seats and getting a return on investment? And this is something that we're going to be talking about more so in the future. The innovation agenda for 2018, mobile payments. Now, with the rise of online ordering, essentially that allows you to have mobile payments, but we're talking about mobile payments within the restaurants. This is an item that several companies are working on. Europe and Asia has had the advantage in the US for the longest time. They don't take someone's credit card and leave and go to the back of the room. Everything is done, right in front of the guest, as it should be. So there are companies that are beginning to change that. Clearly, services like Level Up, they use credit card processing to also have a CRM tied to it, are related to that area, but it's going to become a bigger and bigger concern. And mobile payment or credit card processing companies are also making a big intrusion into the space by buying up POS companies. So you'll see more about that in future webinars. Delivery services remains a big area. Again, we're not going to talk about it here. Not a lot of people are making money at it. It is accretive in sales, but it's a very low margin business, and it's had a big impact on restaurant design, kitchen operations, things like that. Big data is noted here. And of course, we will be talking a little bit about big data to give you a perception, understanding what it is. This is a topic that's going to continue to grow. All these technologies generate information, generate data. The goal of data is to translate it into knowledge that people can make fact-based decisions on. And the sort of the running line is that we're drowning in a tsunami of data and starve for knowledge and information. The top 5 next generation technologies. Number one, the Internet of Things. If you have an Alexa at home, if you've got cameras at home, if you got a digital doorbell at home, these are all examples of the Internet of Things. And there's a lot of gadgets coming out with some form of video or monitoring device. Some of them are going to be useless, but some are significant. In restaurants, we're beginning to see greater use of location-based technology with geofencing around a parking lot. So you can see who's coming into your parking lot. Are they there to pick up an order? Are they there to go to the drive-thru? Are they there to come in to sit down and have dinner? Because you can be identifying them as they come in here. Burger King's done an interesting job with geofencing and geoconquest, where they've gone to their competitor McDonald's and offered them a free Whopper at McDonald's, which of course don't serve. That was kind of a clever campaign. And so we have smart kitchens where they have geosensors inside of the steam tables and refrigerators and walk-ins to let you know whether food's within temperature guidelines and so forth and so on. We will spend some time talking about artificial intelligence and voice-enabled devices. Voice-enabled is going to become bigger and bigger and bigger, along with things like the wearables, virtual reality goggles for training and onboarding, and the use of robotics to help reduce this labor challenge that we have going on so far. Now we're going to get into the guest journey and see how technology enhances the guest journey from the classic one that we've had in the past. The guest journey nowadays begins and ends in social media. I'm making a very broad general statement. I'm not saying that everyone starts on social media and ends on social media, but a large people do. What does that mean? That means they may go to Yelp to see where they should go. They may use OpenTable. They may get into Facebook. They may see what people are saying and recommend in terms of restaurants and places to go to. The days of the professional critic are gone. It's now, families and friends who tell me what to do. With that, one of the big phenomena has been the rise of the chief technology officer. The tech budget for marketing now is bigger than IT in many areas. And this is a big issue. And Brian, I'm going to start with you. You're a classic CTO, broad generalization. Most people in technology are male. Most people in marketing are female. How have you adapted to the fact that this is really changing, where they have this merging and blending and confluence of marketing and technology?
Yeah, so I guess I'll go back to my days in larger companies where we actually had chief marketing officers. My favorite chief marketing officer was someone who really wanted to leverage technology, because every initiative that they had invariably would go through some component of the infrastructure that I put in place. So in BJ's world, we knew that we really had to appeal to this new consumer, and that meant innovative ways for dealing with loyalty, right? And for loyalty to be effective, it really needs to come through the POS. So I used to leverage those relationships to get the money and resources I needed to build out the infrastructure in the way that it needed to be to service my consumers, my constituencies. But I think for all of us, it's a tremendous opportunity to realize that with way less than what we used to have, we can engage with our guest way more.
That's great. Seth, what are your thoughts?
I think a lot of the challenge, and I come from both the technology background and the marketing background, so I can wear both hats. I think a big challenge for many organizations is that the IT organizations and the marketing organizations kind of have different perspectives on the world and speak a different language, so to speak. So marketers are being forced to understand more of the nuances of the technology itself that they're using, and IT needs to understand more of the marketing concepts and how quickly marketing needs data. And real time seems not to be fast enough to make good marketing decisions nowadays. And so organizations where IT keeps their traditional and fundamental role and marketing keeps their traditional fundamental role, and there's a gap between them. And the businesses that can close that gap are the ones that are going to innovate and be most successful with the new technologies. And it is extremely hard on the marketing technology side to keep pace. 5 years ago, there were roughly 500 marketing tech products available through third parties. 5 years flash forward, it's over 5,000.
Wow, yeah, that's insane. And thank you both for sharing that perspective. So let's get into a bit of the journey. I like this graphic because it sort of shows the infinity loop of your guest journey as well as your relationship with your guests. The source from data-driven marketing really sort of conveys that. And they've got 4 basic buckets here in terms of the integrate and understand, analyze and discover, optimize, execute and deliver. And it starts in the lower left one with social, as I mentioned to you before. So I'm going to have Seth walk us through this from his perspective. It's just some key highlights in terms of what to look at this. And this is where it's a good place to ultimately think about who's providing this for you today. And if there's a process in here that you haven't thought about, who might be able to provide it for in the future based on some of the other information we've shared already. So Seth, take it away.
Sure. So as I look at it, integrate and understand is really your sources of marketing data. And digital marketing is indeed a data game. Success and failure is how you can gather data, utilize that data, iterate, change, adapt, improve, and get ahead of competition. That data in itself has no value. And by the way, the data is different sources, as it indicates here. So the ability to bring that together and analyze it gives you pathways for which you can begin to connect with your customers, draw in new customers, understand marketing performance with the different programs that you have. So you want to do more of what works and throw away what doesn't. This is the stage that you sort of figure that out. Then you need the whole act and optimize. So that's that step of iteration, but it's also your technology stacks that allow you to do it. The execute and deliver, I have to stress, you need to understand the governance and the laws. You can be heavily fined, for example, in text-based marketing is a dangerous game if you don't understand the legalities behind it. The fines are very high, and there's activist groups that'll pursue you pretty strongly. And at the end of the day, you need to get that all out and delivered, and then there's an impact. And once again, you read from the data what that impact is. I think this is a great graphic.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And it's going to allow us to then get into another area. This is a graphic provided by Seth as well. And, you know, I was reading an article, the sort of the 12 ways to order pizza from Domino's. Okay, it's no longer that single point of contact. It's now, I'm going to steal this line from Seth. He calls it points of order versus point of sale. And Seth, you know, I mentioned omni-channel before. You have a view on this. Why don't you share your thoughts with us on this?
Yeah, so omni-channel is really a term borrowed from retail. I think restaurant is much more complicated than retail in a lot of ways, in how we reach out to connect with and the relationship we have with our customers. If you think about it, retail, you're buying an item or something, may bring you utility, it may bring you joy, but you're typically not consuming it into your body, and it becomes part of your wellness and your well-being, and your social bonding opportunity. So from the perspective of this customer journey, you know, we're moving to providing how customers want to interact with you when they want to, wherever they are. And so this notion of point of sale, and I've been really drilling it into our business at Xenial to not talk about point of sale. Point of sale is a different kind of concept. Brian was saying, you know, the whole concept of point of sale and counters and restaurant design goes all the way back to the cash register. If we're really going to think about improving the customer journey, we need to really think about how our customers want to interact with us, and then provide the tools and the technologies to do that. The great news is that, you know, 20 years ago I had cloud POS, but it was expensive and difficult, and no one understood it nor wanted it. To date, our customers have computers in their hands all the time, and they want to use it to interact with you. So the adoption from the customer is high and will only increase.
Yeah, and of course we know that the way customers are using this now with this on-demand customer, we're forced to revisit how we design our restaurants as well, in terms of back of the house space for catering orders, delivery orders, front of the house space if no one's sitting in the dining rooms. And you know, Brian, I'm going to go to you a little bit, because I think at Stack you did something innovative, because basically now every table in the bar and in the dining room has a tablet. So you've got 50 to 75 points of order. So how is that?
Yeah, you could very easily have just put Stacked all over that last slide. I mean, essentially that description of our business. Guests can interact with us pretty much however they want. And, you know, I think from a technology standpoint, I've always viewed the tablets as a gap technology and something that would just enable us to get to the consumer's device, because it's much more personal. It's their device. They're plenty powerful, right? So it's been about all the infrastructure behind the scenes that enables that. And to Seth's point, I mean, cloud POS has been around for quite a while, but it wasn't around in the way that we needed it 10 years ago with Stack. So we had to build that tech stack, you know, from the ground up. We engaged a point of sale solution provider to build us a system so that we could put our own user interface on it. And I think, just to Seth's point, what we recognized is that the points of ordering were just growing incredibly, and we need to be prepared for that.
That's good.
You know, so what we have at Stacked right now is just an incredibly expensive kitchen that enables a significant portion of our business to come from delivery and third parties and takeout, a significant portion of our business to come from catering. And, you know, it really, the consumer that is coming to us today says, we want to use you how we want to use you. And I think all of restaurants, I think the restaurant community in general is facing that.
No, that's a good feedback. So those of you who haven't been to Stack, I'd encourage you to see it when you're in Southern California. Now, all this guest journey also includes a lot of guest sentiment, and that's changed a lot over the years. You know, there's about 10 to 12 social media sites where information is available: Twitter, Facebook, you know, TripAdvisor, Yelp, et cetera, et cetera. And some of these are, you know, the days of the internet. Some operators love it, some operators hate it, because anyone anonymously behind a computer screen can say whatever the hell they want. There are a couple of services, and this is an example of one, Merchant Centric, that is able to aggregate their scores of what's going on store by store by store, individual reviews. You can respond to them. They can aggregate it for you. They can group it together with your financial results, because to me, guest sentiment is the canary in the coal mine. If you start seeing guest sentiment that goes south, I guarantee your sales will go down within 3 months. There's a lag time to it. Conversely, if your guest sentiment is going up and you have a store that's been underperforming, you could be assured that over time you'll continue to gain loyalty because of this relationship. So another example of how technology can help you in terms of guest engagement. The next area is employee engagement. And employee engagement is hard. We've got rising wages, we've got a shortage of labor in many markets, and that's an issue. And this graphic right here shows you sort of 9 elements that work very well to enhance guest engagement. The thing that I found really funny about this, if you look in the lower right-hand side, I found this from a snack company. This is a company that encourages you to buy their healthy snacks for your workforce. But they had a great graphic, much better than I've seen in some human resource sites, in terms of what works for employees. And as I looked around for companies that are trying to help you with this, I found one called Shift One. They're originally conceived as a company called Moment Snack. They just rebranded themselves. And they're sort of dealing with that turnover issue, right? That's sort of the measure of success. How do we reduce turnover? It's expensive. You got a high rate of turnover. And in the industry, we've always accepted over 100% turnover as normal in employees and managers, up north of 40 to 50%. And we have to change our thinking on that. We can't afford to do it anymore because you just can't go through everybody. Immigration has changed our workforce a lot because of what's going on. So we're not getting a lot of people who are willing to come into this country and start on those type of jobs. And you have a teenage workforce that quite honestly would rather go drive for Uber than they want to go become a dishwasher. So you got some real challenges here. And what Shift One has done is to leverage the millennials' relationship with tech by creating an app-based function that lets them have the managers, do contests. They can talk about how they're working. They provide community because they're able to have, sort of high fives, badges. The CEO of a company can provide a kudos to the top performing server, even if they have 1,000 restaurants. And again, just to give you a little taste of some of the solutions that are out there to help you. The next area that's helping with employee engagement is the use of virtual reality. Companies now are beginning to use it, like Honeygrow up in Boston is using it for onboarding. You could use it for training. You could be in a kitchen in a virtual way. You could be interacting with guest services. Now, this is a nascent technology. It'll take a little bit longer for it to be more commercialized, but some companies are beginning to do this in an effective way. The lower right-hand picture, you'll see this construction guy sort of inside the virtual reality seeing a different field. This is, again, very new, but this is going to be coming up more and more. The next area we're going to look at then is workflow automation. Now, and that works in 2 ways. There's the use of robotics and automation in restaurants. This gives you an illustration of a burger line. I've done a webinar and I've done several presentations at conferences on robotics. I was even fortunate enough to have a robot on stage with me at the Restaurant Finance and Development Conference. And the term for them is also cobots. These are robots that are not eliminating your job, they're helping you. So if I can make you a basic burger, a basic pizza, and human beings sort of do the finishing touches, that would work. There's a concept that was opened up recently in Boston called Spyce. That's SPYCE.com. The consulting chef was Daniel Boulud, one of the country's great leading chefs, who worked with these young MIT grads who developed a restaurant concept that's totally automated, with the exception that a human being employee will do the finishing touches and hand you the bowl. But you self-order a kiosk, the robot makes the food for you, presents the food, and then, of course, it's handed to you by a human being. So there's some fascinating things taking place. But when you got minimum wage of $15, which is about $30,000 a year of salary, and you got a kiosk that costs you 28 to 30, you got a robot that costs you 30, the lines have crossed, and that's where we're at. This next area, which has grown a lot, I'm going to ask Seth and then Brian to talk about it, is data analytics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. Again, data analytics is when you sort of gather all the data and analyze it. Machine learning, artificial intelligence, how you make sense out of it. But I'll let Seth take it away.
Yeah, I think this is really a great area, but an area that it's not really defined well yet. From our perspective, data analytics is really the core value in most businesses that have been around a while. That's kind of giving you information to questions you know to ask, right? And so you get the answers to questions you know. Machine learning is this idea of taking programs themselves and exploring large data sets to bring back things that it thinks may be interesting to you. You then say, no, I'm not interested. Then you say, yes, I'm interested. And then it goes and digs in deeper. Artificial intelligence is this idea of machines actually asking questions of itself and then seeking out its own answers. I think for the most part, and in looking, fintech is probably the leader in all these areas right now. As I've talked to big data scientists, machine learning with big data sets is really where the big growth opportunities are for most. Artificial intelligence is, to some extent, a promise that's still being developed.
Yeah, I'll just kind of tailor off on that. I agree with everything Seth has said, but the interesting thing to me, or I guess more frustrating than anything, is that for years, BI tools have only been delivering the questions that we ask, right? So they've just been delivering on the data analytics promise. But what we really need now, with all of the pressures that we as restaurateurs face, like the new labor wages, like continued this glut of choice that our consumers have, right? We really have to operate our businesses smarter. So sometimes it even goes from instead of looking at big data, what's the small data? Which one of your menu items drives affinity? If you offer the wrong menu item to a new guest, they might not come back in the next 6, 8, 10 weeks. But if you offer them the right item, you might make a regular. So I think that's where we can better leverage machine learning. And, for most restaurant companies, I've talked to Sharif over at TGI Fridays. His situation is much different than most of us, right? They have billions of transactions to go off of. But for a lot of us, we have to use the software service providers to really get a good amount of data.
Now we have an example of data in many forms and fashions. So Seth, I'm going to ask you to comment on this as well.
Yeah, I think that what Brian is talking about, that, driving consumer behavior, right, is really what we're getting at. There's two ways that I like to look at this from a marketing perspective. So one is we have all these tools, let's assume, in place to pull in data, and we want to put in these tool sets to market and to do that scalably. I think the beginning step for a lot of companies is to say, I want a transactional focus. Somehow I want to increase certain metrics, right? The number of times visit, the average ticket size. I want more response to limited time offers. I want to test limited time offers at small and then scale it up large, et cetera. There's nothing wrong with that perspective, but there's a higher value that you can apply, and that's applying these tool sets for relational value. And the relational value is now shifting, instead of month by month, quarter by quarter, what's our financial performance, to say, what is the lifetime value of my customers? Can I keep them as a lifetime customer? How can I, over that period of time, increase the value to the business and to them as a consumer, right? Not a one-way road, drive more sales, but a two-way street of relationship. We have the tool sets to do that, but it takes software to be able to do one-to-one marketing in mass and on scale. And it's certainly what everybody should be looking for as an end goal in their pursuits of this.
That's great. Good input. So one of our last slides, just talking about analytics. You can see here that sort of supporting what Seth just talked about in terms of things that are strategic and operational, and what you might try and use analytics for. This is a growing field. I mean, I'm sure in the future we'll do a webinar strictly on analytics and the use of data scientists and how to get the best information out of your system as it extends. We're also going to be participating in Sun Valley with a conference called MILE, which is Marketing Innovation Learning Learning Exchange. And this is going to be sponsored by Revelry Brands for CMOs only by invite. If anyone's interested, send me an email and I'll try and get you an invite for it. It's coming up in a couple of weeks. And we're going to get into more detail regarding this. So as we wrap up, let's talk about how companies can begin to prepare. So one thing is to recognize that there's a glut of choice that is permanent. And with an increasing competition, both for restaurants and for technology companies, it's not going to get any better soon. Brian? Or I'm sorry, this is Seth. I apologize. Seth, for you?
So I think a big thing to do is to say, well, look, I have a certain state of technology in my company. How do I move to something that's better? And of course, I think it all leads to cloud and SaaS and for flexibility and cost purposes and capabilities. But how do you start? And so as we speak with our customers and the brands we're involved with, we talk to them about what are their biggest pain points? How do you get rocks out of shoes? And that's a great place to start in an organization. Where is there a political reality? Meaning, where can you get the fastest pace of agreement and cooperation to actually implement changes in your organizations? And sometimes you need to start with a smaller goal, a lesser improvement, so you can prove success and have others say, okay, me next, help me. And the last point is really looking for points of differentiation. If all you are looking to do is to maintain competitiveness with your competitor, you run the risk of the next sucker punch from an economic downturn or something else making you a laggard.
Great point. Brian?
Yeah, I guess one of my favorite examples of what Seth is talking about is the movie Chef. Initially Jon Favreau is just a chef who wants to deliver great food out of his food truck, and then as his son starts tweeting their location and they get more and more customers, he starts to dig in and understand why, right? So can you place a hook to let them know that technology isn't just plumbing anymore? It's actually something that can generate revenue or help you keep guests happy, or it can be leveraged in so many ways. So my approach has always been to find that one opportunity where you can set a hook and make your entire organization into technology believers. As far as machine learning, let me start with automation. It doesn't have to be incredibly expensive. There's so many things out there that are available. If this, then that. Jotform, node libraries that are free. That you can very easily implement small pieces of automation throughout your organization that just remove the heartbeats. I have a monthly automated sales form that goes out to all of our mall locations. Well, it's just a heartbeat that I don't have to deal with. As it gets into machine learning, what you really need is a lot of transactions. So if you're a smaller organization, don't think that this is something that you could do on your own. But there are great companies out there, just to name one of them, Marketing Vitals, right? They focus just on the revenue side, but they leverage machine learning across their entire organization and all of their customers to better understand your data and your business so that they can help you identify the best menu items to have, or the best locations, not the best locations, but the best employees to train other employees. So there's a lot of good examples of that out there.
Great. Thank you. And then the last one is to really find solution partners that understand the industry, you, and where everything is going. Not all of this has to be in your pain point. A lot of these vendors will work with you because it's to their best interest and self-interest to help you make a better decision. So go ahead and lean on them. Make sure that you're getting case studies to prove that what they're claiming to be true exists. You're not buying vaporware. All this is very important. So we are going to get a copy of the webinar out to you. We will fix the area that we lost audio so that it's a little bit more cohesive. Apologize for the control that we could not exert on this area. But keep in tune for our next webinar. You can reach us at different places. And once again, I want to thank Seth and Brian for your great participation. You're fantastic panelists, a lot of topics to cover in a short amount of time. And for our audience, thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to join us today. Have a wonderful afternoon and talk soon.